You got it.
All right. Great. So thanks everyone for joining another episode of the OpenJS Foundation's Security Collab Space meetings. Today is, what is it, October 2nd. And we are going to kind of get into things. We have a couple of guests here from GitHub to talk to us about Dependabot, and then we'll dig into a couple of other items that we had on the agenda as well. So I will turn it over to you, Madison, to get us started.
Cool, sounds good. So hi everybody, I'm Madison Oliver. I manage the advisory database curation team here at GitHub. John is one of the wonderful members on my team. A nice TLDR of what our team does is we provide the vulnerability information that powers Dependabot, NPM audit, NuGet audit, and a slew of other wonderful automated security tooling. So I'll share here in chat. I don't know if it's helpful for me to share my screen of the issue 2 for streaming purposes.
Yeah, why not?
So the reason that we're here today is because we released a feature last year where Dependabot alerts surface calls to vulnerable functions to end users. So we beta shipped this feature in Python and are exploring how to do it with JavaScript. One of the things that we noticed along the way is having a defined format for how we refer to these affected function names, or I'll say symbols to be more open. How we refer to these would be incredibly helpful for this purpose. And we expect this, right, to impact the broader JavaScript community, albeit we are focusing first rather heavily on NPM for obvious reasons. But we hope this information can be used by the broader JavaScript community and will certainly impact the broader community. One of the, I'll say, big benefits of this feature is that it will create Dependabot alerts, or it will allow Dependabot alerts to be a lot more specific. Ideally, users will know if they are actually calling the vulnerable code, and not even if they are, where they're calling it as well. So then they can determine their own prioritization. Are they is this something that they are in fact vulnerable to? If they're not calling the vulnerable code, then that can mean something for their prioritization as well. So we are coming to the OpenJS community for feedback on what this format could look like, what things we should be considering if we're not already considering them, if anything seems egregiously incorrect or maybe really good. Generally just looking for feedback. So I created this issue in the Security Collab Space repo. We'll be taking feedback for the next couple of weeks. So please feel free to put any feedback, any questions, anything like that on the issue as well. And John and I are here today to take any initial feedback, answer any more questions, anything that we can clarify as well.
Great. Thanks for the overview. I peeked into the issue as well. I see Jordan had a few comments there too. Yeah, particularly the many entry points. I don't know if that's been looked at all.
Real quick, can I ask a question on that? Since I'm assuming everyone here knows JavaScript better than I do. If you have multiple entry points, would they all stem in an NPM context? Would they all stem out of the same package, and could they overlap in namespaces?
Well, I guess I can
Fair,
try to
fair.
answer that. Yeah, I guess I can try to answer that question. It seems like the security boundary for an NPM package really is the package itself. Like the contents of the package once on your system are accessible to any process that runs on the system, right? So the boundary is pre and post download, right? So the network layer. So once it's on the system, anything that has access those files can essentially execute that code. And most files within a package are individually accessible and executable. And so I think that's kind of what Jordan's alluding to, is the fact that sure,
Mm.
there might be a specific code path, and maybe that's a good, this is the term that comes to mind as, I'm not sure if you've been using this language internally, but code paths are the thing that I have in mind. And I know code
Yeah.
QL, I think actually might use that language as well, right? So code paths, vulnerable code paths. But I think in terms of many exploits, let's say like a prototype pollution exploit as an example, there might be multiple entry points or multiple ways that you can essentially hit that vulnerability for a
Mhm.
given piece of software, like given package. So although usually CVEs apply against the entire package, there's actually potentially multiple vectors.
Right. Well, and just to make a point,
Sure.
yes, you're absolutely correct that there might be multiple like attack vectors in. This is more trying to describe the thing internal to the package that would be attacked, not necessarily the routes to it. And so we need, so yeah, code paths are what we've been using, or call paths would be how a user would reference that particular thing, which would then be vulnerable and could be used in multiple contexts.
Right. So like usage would be really interesting, like how you actually execute that file, but like it really might depend on like the runtime and the interpretation of the contents of the file, right? Like it's very runtime
No,
specific
indeed,
as well.
indeed. Yeah, this all started with a conversation with folks at NPM, and I specifically had a 2-day long conversation where I had no answers at the end of it. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, so sorry, you're saying like the reason for getting this metadata more granular, it seems like you're trying to get more granular with the metadata that's available through the audit process. So the hope is eventually that, you know, instead of just knowing that an entire package is vulnerable to X, it's like a specific file or path, code path.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you thought about, because essentially what you're trying to also map is like usage of packages, and that seems like almost a precursor to being able to do any kind of like provide any kind of metadata about the actual exploitation of the software. It seems like you need to map first the usage of the software, and that will give you essentially all the available like code paths, or right.
I'm not sure I follow on.
I see Wes's hands up. I'm not sure if that's related to what I just said.
Yeah, it was. Sorry, I'm catching up. So if this has already been covered, please shut me down. But specifically on that point, I think there's two sides, right? There's the whoever's filing the CV and providing the metadata, and then there's the tooling that actually ends up doing the reporting to the end user. I think, Darcy, what you're talking about is probably maybe a little bit of both, but mostly sitting in the reporting to the user side. Like, I think if we had some metadata that gave us the specific path to the file within the file and the exported method name, then like we, as the JavaScript ecosystem, could figure out what are the semantics that we care about to report on that. And it could be that we have the exports field, and you know, then we use that to determine it. We might need to do some static analysis to see if it was like exported from that file as foo, but then re-exported from another file as bar. Like all that stuff to me is kind of like the tooling that we would want to build once we have the metadata coming from the reporters.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that fits in here with how you all were thinking about it. Yeah, and it definitely makes it really fuzzy, and it's also a moving target. That's the other thing, right? So these things
Yeah.
change over time, and ideally, if you don't want the CVE to have enumerate every path by which you can import it, right? You
It should
want
be a canonical path or
tooling
something.
to, right, to be able to do it as the ecosystem changes, right? If we change the spec around exports to have a new thing, like we shouldn't have to go back to every CVE and like update some metadata, right? We should be able to like have it evolve as we go. So I think we should make sure we're just very clear on like which part of that process we're targeting.
Yeah, just to speak to what I put in chat there, like this feels very technically, it's going to be tough. And I feel for doing this. You might be able to do exactly what Wes is saying, like with stack analysis, to be able to find some of those common paths and be able to protect some folks that way. But I'd be mindful not to like market this as something that's like fully encapsulates all potential paths into an exploit. Yeah. Okay, cool.
No, of course
Yeah,
not. No, this is like the MVP, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And
and-
you might be able to get 80-20, like the 80-20
Yeah,
rule. Like
exactly.
this provides a ton of value by just being able to say this, like this is the path, the function that
Yeah.
you call into and
And
path to the file.
And actually, since files keep coming up, one thing I've been focused on a lot is call paths that a user would use, because our advisories have version ranges on them. And the files can move around between versions, but the API that a user calls tends to be more stable. So just some additional context there.
Michael?
Yeah, I was just like, this sounds really interesting because to me, like we get faced with, Node has a dependency, there's an advisory, or I was asking about CVEs, we'll get something that says, hey, you've got a problem. Now we got to figure out, like, are we actually affected or not? And I think there's a lot of noise where, yeah, there's a CVE, but it doesn't actually percolate up. So it would be great if that came along, the CVE or the advisory came along with, and you're only affected if you actually call this API. Even more, it would be great if then the other part, which I forget was mentioning, maybe it was Darcy, is the tools that actually reported if you were vulnerable or not could actually factor that in. So like NPM audit could say, oh yeah, well, there's an advisory, but I can tell by looking at your code that you don't even call that, right?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'll point out on that, there's also a question of an advisory not having the data doesn't mean there is no call. Or
Sure,
the
right.
advisory having data, like at the moment, this is quite manual, so not having the data could just mean we couldn't find it. So, anyway.
The other thing I'd wonder is we've discussed a number of times trying to help authors provide some of the data to say like, hey, well, I've looked at it and because you got this long chain, I'm one above that one, I looked at it. And so like, even if the tool can't automatically figure out what method it is, I don't know if since you're already doing something in this space, if you have any way to then provide the author to add some metadata that says, yeah, and in my opinion, this doesn't affect me either. If you're, or even crowdsource some of that, like, hey, here's an advisory against my module, but here's the only method that it actually affects her. So just some other things that, if you're already working in that area, those would add a lot of value too.
Wes?
Yeah, I'm now a little distracted by Michael's comments. I think that actually I have a question. Is there a method by which folks would be able to go back and append new metadata to old CVEs? Is that a thing?
So I think from our perspective, we want to be careful about saying CVE or GitHub Security Advisory. So from our perspective, they can be one and the same, right? So I'm going to be very explicit. This will be on GitHub Security Advisories. We as GitHub have the capacity to go back and add that metadata to historical advisories. And ideally at some point, yeah, John just shared as well, we're on an open source repository where we take feedback on already published advisories. This ideally, once defined and decided, would be a field that folks could also give us feedback on publicly.
Okay, so if we have the ability, oh, go ahead. Yeah,
I just want to add a comment on there though. So when we do take feedback, we do vet it and we do expect to have an open conversation and we ask you for references and all the rest of it. It's unfortunate that there are people out there that want to change advisories to suit their preferences, and we don't necessarily, like, we have to curate this for everyone, right? Like, so just throwing that out there.
so ideally you don't have to curate it for everybody. Honestly, I don't I think today, part of the reason probably why this is so difficult for end users is that you all are doing this and it's too big of a workload. There's no way I think I can't imagine a business case where GitHub actually thinks that they're going to make enough money off of this stuff to justify the sheer wild amount of workload it would take to vet all of these from the JavaScript ecosystem. I mean, by all means, tell me I'm wrong, but I just can't imagine that. And so I think ideally, again, this is where we have to think about the two ends here. I think the tooling can do some of this stuff without you all having to have it, right? But it'd be nice if, because we don't own all the tooling. So for example, if Sneak is going to go and also have something, and some people are using NPM audit, and I don't know today that's currently not backed by the GitHub advisory database, right? That's still
It is.
Oh, that changed. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, there's a blog post out there somewhere.
yeah. Anyway, my point is people use a lot of things, and so it'd be nice if when we tackle it from both ends, we can have maybe something where like you could say, hey, I trust GitHub security and this other source, right? Or, something like
Yeah.
that could then overlay so that you all aren't responsible for everything here.
No, I
right.
agree. So I will say, our team maintains this database, this GitHub advisory database. We don't pretend to be the universal database for everything, for everyone, forever, whatever. Who you trust and how you import that is sort of the root problem there. Like, identity on the internet is hard. Trust is also a hard problem. Long term, I agree with you. I think we do need more trusted sources. Short term, we're trying to bootstrap something.
Yeah, totally. Bootstrapping's fine. I get that, but I would say that we in the NPM ecosystem, we install things we trust all the time, and they're not any more trustworthy than just that we looked at them once, right? So like if I could have an NPM package name that it exports a list of rules that I want to follow, and then the GitHub advice, then maybe Dependabot or whatever can layer that on top of the decision making, or then other third-party tooling can, then I think that's actually a pretty fine case.
I agree. So I just shared a link to our API for the repo level advisory. So if you want to get like a raw access to a repo, totally controlled by the repo maintainers, there it is. I can also get you into contact with the PM for that if you want. Like, so at the moment, it's basically unstructured text fields, which is, yeah, it is what it is. Ping me.
So is that an API where like the maintainer of a module or package can add advisory information?
No, it is the. So if you have a repo on GitHub, you can create a security advisory about anything. If you trust a particular repo, this is the API to go and read the advisories in a given repo.
Okay, so this is like to get additional. We're more like we want to get rid of advisories, right? Like,
yes.
I understand that, hey, you can have some more, but like our typical problem isn't we have.
No, I'm aware.
We have too many, so it's like we want to narrow it down to the ones that actually matter.
Right, which in my perspective requires richer data to act on, and hence like this whole initiative. There's getting the data though is the hard part in my mind. Surfacing it is easy. Like you just splat everything out at everyone and then they hate you. Or
that was really why, like, I think, Wes was mentioning is if we can crowdsource. And the thing I just wanted to add before I forget is, like, I think we need to divorce who you trust from knowing who it is. Like, I think it can be as simple as a signature that you can verify this that says it came from this maintainer. I mean, like, I'm already taking his packages, so
yeah,
I think I can trust him to tell me whether he's vulnerable or not, because they could put so much else in the code much more easily. That
no, I agree. But I would also say that is trusting by identity. And so crowdsourcing is sort of throwing away the identity aspect there.
Well, except that when I meant crowdsource, I meant like all the maintainers could provide info on their own, right? So maybe I'm just
no, I agree 100% with that perspective. We're not necessarily talking about that today. Sorry.
Yeah, like if this effort of defining some sort of format can lead us there, right? I would love to just get this information directly from the code owners and maintainers themselves, working under the assumption, right? They know a lot more about their package than I do. But I need to be able to tell them what to give us and how to give it to us so that we can actually use it. So this is step one, and what I am hoping will, lead to those sort of things.
Wes?
I just want to make a quick comment. I think what Michael was talking about with the crowdsourcing here, it's not just the maintainer of package X that we might want to trust for opinions here. It might be IBM publishes this, and we trust IBM to make decisions on behalf of package maintainer X, right? So when I'm thinking about this, like how do people give this to you? I think actually what you want is people to not ever give it to you. You want people to publish it on their own, and then consumers to be able to assign trust where they want, right? So you don't need to maintain a complicated database of all these things all the time. You just need a contract that somebody else can implement so that I can say I trust IBM when I'm updating or getting these reports here.
Fair. I'll say on that, like IBM's a case where there's a company with a reputation, right? I think we also want security researchers who find maybe not a RDoS, but like a remote code execution vulnerability. Like if that's a real thing, I think the community wants to know about it. For individuals that don't necessarily have a reputation, how do you deal with that? And that's
you don't. No, but that's what I'm saying. You don't. I do, as the person who's saying I trust that user, right? So that's the goal here, is that you are not as single source of truth here, because package maintainers are not always going to be prompt. And if I'm in the React ecosystem and I say I trust Facebook about everything React, and they just publish a list of things that augment on top of your, and it might not be Facebook. It might be one individual, Dan Abramov, because I already trust Dan Abramov, right? And like, that's fine.
Right, but when Dan Abramov 2 comes around,
then I had Dan Abramov 2. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't need to be you.
But you don't necessarily know ahead of time, right? That's what I'm saying.
I think we might be thinking about it like, I can see from because maybe John, you're thinking about the I want to know about vulnerability side of things versus I want to like exclude them. I think from the I want to exclude them, the model of I trust this set of people works well. On the I want to know about vulnerabilities, I agree that there needs to be a central place that somebody who you don't know can report it and have that make it into like the NPM list so everybody knows about it.
Well, and that's what we do, is what I'm saying. Like that's our community contribution forum. And I'm not, again, I'm not trying to say don't trust other people. Please do. Please spin up more databases. Like we need help.
But I don't think I think the difference is like, I don't think anybody would argue to say, let's have everybody report their own things and have that fragmented. It'd be more on the it doesn't apply to me side. It makes a lot more sense to have that extra data. I don't know, Wes, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where
that is what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, before I turn it over to you, Darcy, are we talking about two things in terms of like having all the data in a database, or like having, fields in your package or a file in your package that lists CVEs and says this one doesn't affect me? You know what I mean? So
at the moment, we're trying to determine a format for that we can put into a structured data type. OSV is the format we're using as an interchange format of how we write down this function over here has problem XYZ. And that is its own hard problem. Let me actually pull up the OSV thread about this too, since that's going to be relevant.
Okay. Darcy, you want to chime in while?
Yeah, like I was just looking at the Python implementation, and it looks like it's based on stack graphs and the way that you're able to determine the vulnerable. Because I think what you're looking for from us, and I could be wrong, Mass and John, like instead of this larger conversation about advisories, but specifically on this feature, the function, the naming, I guess the name convention also, I'm not sure if you're also looking for like feedback, whether we think that this is going to be impactful. I'm not sure if that's the kind of, I guess I had a couple of questions. One, and I'll start with the first one. Why is there a requirement in that issue for not having file paths in the function name? I know that the signature for the function affected function name today is like bracket package name and then like a dot path to the prototype chain essentially for.
So the reason for that is for NPM customers, the imports tend to be, I guess, through the stack graph rather than through file paths in practice.
So can you say that one more time? It will be
So for the code we've looked at on GitHub, for people importing NPM packages, they tend to import the package and then pull a path off of that rather than import the file directly from, like, by and large.
Yeah, so the concern here I have is that the module systems within JavaScript today are all over the place, and actually you're dealing with module resolution, which actually can be different. So I would have a real concern about how you're making that connection between essentially the import statement and the or even require statement potentially, and how you're actually mapping it to a module. And then what I would also, a piece of feedback I'd also give within NPM packages is that you can have nested modules and nested packages. So bundled dependencies are a thing, NPM supports that. And so you can have named, and I saw this problem at GitHub and Dependabot itself, is that in fact, it's a problem that continues to exist today, is that the left-hand assignment in package.json, essentially the manifest where you put all your dependencies, the left-hand assignment of the name is treated as the source of truth. So if I go look at the insights dashboard today, the dependency graph tab will actually show me that I have a dependency on a, let's say, Axios, an HTTP client which is a package a package in the ecosystem today. I can actually alias and bundle a package called Axios inside my project today or in my package, and it's a completely different package than the one that's being linked to in the dependency graph and the insights, because you don't consider the right-hand assignment, right? Which is where version information lives, aliasing lives.
Yes, and
so those, yeah.
If I may, like, getting into dependency graph is a bit beyond what we're looking at today. We are looking at data storage, right? And it's for a given package, because our advisories are about NPM package XYZ, like Lodash, whatever. What paths off of that could be called, which are vulnerable? And I 100% agree.
I'm just saying, if that
module systems
information is
all over the
incorrect,
place.
if you say Lodash, let's say, it's nested Lodash, I just don't want to see what I've seen happen before with Dependabot, and in which case it incorrectly assumes that I have a dependency, which is actually a different, it just takes the name and says, we know about this package having an issue, having an advisory, and incorrectly assumes like the path or something like that. So that's just like one thing to be mindful, that there are errors and issues in today in the way that in that understanding. And then what I'd be very mindful is like the file path is actually very much tied to the execution. And that's why I brought that up in terms of why is there this, it's going to be different than what you can do in Python, where the import, like the module resolution, is very well defined. We have a very complex, like depending on what runtime or environment or tool that you're using, the way that the package would be imported or bundled might be completely different, right? So like that's why it's really tough to say that from an entry point you can say package Lodash, this specific function can be called. It's only in a specific type of environment, right?
Yeah, fair. Could I ask you to iterate a few gnarly examples on that OpenJS issue?
Yeah, totally. I can give you a whole bunch of, like, I actually was putting together one just right now where I was fetching. I was essentially going to do a module exports where I fetch the API from like a third-party registry and our third-party domain and
Yeah.
eval the code. So like in that case, you have a completely dynamic API, right? You're
Yeah, yeah,
evaling
yeah.
your function. You have completely dynamic API. You'll never be able to statically analyze that.
Well,
Or
so I would say it would be even more useful if you could get examples in the wild rather than constructing one.
yeah, I can do that as well. Like the
Because
biggest one for me is just like that
No.
if you're not going to have file paths as part of this, then you
Mhm.
are making an assumption, which I don't know what assumption you want to make about the runtime. So if you're trying to service npm, you might say, oh well, we only we'll treat the implementation of the imports and requires as if it's a node. Well, what version of node? And what, like what?
Yeah, no, and that was actually like the 2-day conversation I was having that I mentioned, was that like this was different on different node versions. And yeah, maybe we need to do both. I don't know.
I think that you're in a tough place for sure. Like I think that this is really tough to statically analyze. In fact, again, going back to what I said, it's impossible. So you could make some inferences or something, but I think whatever you do end up doing, I would be just, because if you are
going back to the concept, going back to the concept of an 80-20 though, if we can cover 80% of what's out there in the wild, that can deliver a fair amount of value.
I don't think that packages understand how they're being imported today at all.
Fair.
So
yeah,
if you thought this is a huge problem, yeah.
If you can iterate some gnarly examples, I would love to get into them.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. It's a big problem. I'm sure everybody on this call from our side understands this. But the ecosystem today is having a hard time actually creating packages for all the consuming cases, all the runtimes, right? How do I create an ESM, CJS, dual export module? Where basically, if you know the Python 2 to 3 transition, JavaScript is having that moment with the multiple module systems, and it's really frustrating. So I don't think packages even understand how their code is being consumed. They're doing their best in terms of trying to have all the cases met, but that's why this is really tough to figure out, and why I would say more information about the path in this vulnerable function advisory would be helpful, and it actually reduces the need to rely on a module import export.
It does, but then it potentially breaks the concept of major versions, because the files may move around from 1.0.0 to 1.9.7 or something.
I mean, that's semantic versioning, right? People can ship breaking changes.
They can ship whatever they want.
Exactly. So every new incremental.
No, I know, but it's
version.
The API that someone calls, most developers tend to respect their users and maintain their APIs reasonably well.
So this is again, the fact of what you just said goes back to what I was saying before. If you can solve this problem, you've solved the semantic version changes.
I know.
Right, because you've basically been able to map the entire person's
API. I'm right,
Right.
and I'm just saying that in practice, APIs tend to be reasonably stable, not universal. There's tons of edge cases.
So you have to put the Semver range somewhere, and so right today that is put in the top level advisory. So I would say that if a advisory applies and you have a hard path in there, and then the library moves that path, that is a new advisory when we start adding this metadata. So I think that actually solves
a new
that problem.
payload on the same advisory, but yeah.
Or sure, however y'all structure that. Just I meant decouple this concept. You don't need to go back and update it just because they moved it. That would be a new one, I think. And I think that's a reasonable resolution that avoids we have to care about people's Semver, because frankly, they don't follow Semver. I am positive. I've worked on projects that actually do follow it, and we would get people moving files around, and we'd be like, sorry, there's a breaking change. And people would be like, no. The main export remained the same. And and we'll be like, yeah. I'm sorry, this is a breaking change. So you can't actually
Yeah.
move files and maintain semver backward unless you're using the exports key and really limiting what you actually are exposing. And like, I don't know if we have good stats, but it's probably somewhere in the like 80 to 90% range of packages are not scoping that. And if you actually look at the history, so maybe now it's better than 80 or 90%, but if you look at the history, it's probably somewhere in the realm of 99% of packages are not using exports to limit what you can import as a consumer. So we need to make sure that these things, you know, work on those ones that are old and get discovered, you know, which is effectively probably a large portion of them. Yeah. So I think as long as we just keep the semberness out of the report, or if you have some other way on the back end to like map, you know, this is the definition for it in this semver range, and this is the definition in this other semver range, but the CV report applies across all of them, like that's fine too.
Yeah, so the way we do this today is we have one advisory and it has multiple, what we call affected products. And each affected product tends to be a semver range. There's broadly speaking, two classes, the packages that don't care, and it's just whatever the version, and you know, everything prior to that. We'll have a fixed version, right? 1, 2, 3, and everything under 1, 2, 3 is affected. And then there are the more, I don't know if professional is the right word, or more complex projects where you have version 1.2.3 and then 2.3.4 and 3.4.5. And you've got your 3 major branches that are supported for whatever time period. Each of those affected products would have its own affected symbols on it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I asked this in chat, like, does that make it more brittle? Like if you define the explicit path to this, if I move around that path, I'm still potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes, I think is the answer to that question.
So does it might invalidate some CVs that if you start to see these filed with these specific paths, it's harder to capture a wider affected version because of this. Do you see like where that?
Yes, but
actually...
I would say that we already have that problem with the major branch issue, where we don't want to tell a user who's on a 2. Whatever. Like we want to provide rich data about where the closest fixed version is, so to speak. So if you're on a 2 branch, there is a 2. Whatever release that fixes, or if there is a 2. Whatever release that fixes your issue, we will put that in the advisory. And then it's sort of up to the tooling to figure out what is the appropriate place to move, given the set of advisory data and given the user's preferences.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of it's not being fixed, it's being moved. And now this information that might have been tied to the CVE, making it more explicit about where the CVE is living by moving that exploit, a prototype pollution exploit or something, into a different function, now changes that path and invalidates the CVE potentially.
When you say moving, do you mean like you've got 2 major branches and the same exploit?
You got 2 versions, like let's say, like it doesn't matter, like the exploit still lives within it's still, you know, it could be within the same major version line, it doesn't matter, like, but I get a CV applied to whatever my software, and I decide to ship a new release which just moves the CVE somewhere because the advisory was explicit, you know. I don't know, it just seems like it might, I use the term brittle, it might make these more, by making it more explicit to help, let's say, with automating, like I think the idea here is getting more information hopefully helps you automate the introspection and then remediation of these, but actually it might harm in terms of like the churn that you might see.
Well, I think you're correct. It does create more churn. I will say making it explicit also makes data generation easier or possible. And again, we deal with this problem today just with versions. Someone can come out with it. For many of our advisories, we have everything up to and including 1.2.3 is affected, and then 1.2.4 comes out and it's not actually fixed, but it is not necessarily in the vulnerable range.
Right. Okay.
Same exact thing, right? Is like we can't see the future, unfortunately.
So I'm mindful of time. And we can certainly
Oh.
talk more again in a week or whenever. But I wanted to just double back with you two to see if there's anything specific that you wanted to further get, feedback on or thoughts on.
Yeah, so I think is the format that's proposed in that issue, I guess, workable as a starting point is, I think, our fundamental question. Correct me if I'm wrong, Madison.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there are, I'm sure, as you can imagine too, there are a number of teams across GitHub on this, more engineers than I can probably count. So they are all also deeply interested in your feedback. So feel free to follow up on the issue too. We will have lots of eyes on it internally as well, and you'll see lots more folks from GitHub weigh in. So if anybody on the call, or anybody not on the call as well, anybody has additional questions, points to share, I'm going to make sure to share what we discussed today with the team too, but we'll continue these discussions on the issue as well. And if it's helpful, I am happy to come back. We're happy to continue discussing these in the meetings themselves if that's useful for the group, or happy to just rely on the issue and do it asynchronously.
Yeah, I want to say too, like, we want to make sure that this data that we're producing is useful outside of GitHub too. So we do care about your feedback.
So that's the collab space issue. I just want to make sure that, like, I think Wes came after some of the issues were shared.
Yeah, I think I had a few open, but I just want to make sure it's the right one because I've now got too many and I don't know which one's like the active thread.
Cool. All right, great. So we can do more on the issues. Feel free to post in the OpenJS Slack. I mean, it's always better to have the conversation on the issue, but if you wanted to do anything in Slack as well. And then if you want to come back anytime, we meet weekly, so I'll be happy to discuss it further. Ben, do you want to jump into the doc drafts for a moment?
I don't know if we have enough time to do anything meaningful. Totally, John, this is not like, this was time well spent. Like, but like 10 minutes to go through those docs and get feedback, I don't think is going to cut it. So here's my ask for Darcy, Michael, Wes, and Joe. In the agenda, there's a GitHub issue that links to these two documents. I think you've probably seen them before from Jordan. I really need some critical thinking applied to those documents. I've added a bunch of comments, but I really need, sorry, Michael, yes.
Separate, once you're done, I have another thing I want.
Yes,
unrelated thing.
Okay, no worries. What was I saying? Yes, so I need some critical thinking on those, and I think Jordan really needs some collective feedback. So please, in the next couple of days, take a look and add in comments for your feedback. And I need to wrap those up basically as soon as possible and try to get those things published. So thank you.
Yeah, and Ben, if you want to find some time this week too, I can try to go through them with you or figure out ways that we can move things forward.
Yeah, most efficient there, Joe. You've got that magic link for my calendar. I don't have one of those for you.
Okay.
So it's easier for you to find a spot on my calendar than it is for me to find a spot on yours. So find a time and grab me.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Michael?
I wasn't sure about what the topic was in terms of, GitHub and things. So one thing I was hoping it might have been around, but we've been turning on some of like the OSSF best practices, and some of those are like, the getting Dependabot to do updates for us. The one challenge I have is like in this repo, it's an example. It's a repo that has a whole bunch of examples. And there's just no way I think we're going to be able to keep up with the GitHub, updates. In that, like, we basically have, I don't know, 20, 30 package JSON files in there, and we get individual pull requests against each one. So I don't know if you're the right group or whatever, but like, if there was ever, and maybe there was one that I don't know about, but if there was some way to say, just give me a single PR for all the updates, or at least for everything, when you can see, I think in like the first set, there's like a bunch which are like update the same things, because like in case of examples, we have a lot of the same things. So it might be like update bindings from blah, 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 but then the next one is update bindings from blah to blah somewhere else, right? So.
Before Wes chimes in, is there a response to that? Yeah. John.
Real quick, we are not the right team, but let me do some furious searching and see if I can get you a link.
Yeah,
I
okay.
shared a link to a blog in chat. I think I maybe
Yep.
just have more information. So our Dependabot team is recently just beta shipped grouped version updates and has beta shipped a couple of things recently, all in regards to exactly that for exactly
Okay.
that problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Thanks.
all over the last couple of months.
I will say
Okay.
too, like we internally do take the noise issue very seriously, and it is of course a balance between like we want all the data, like our team wants all the data. Getting the data to the right people is a separate hard problem that people are involved in.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks for that, Madison. I'll read up on that. Good to hear there's already something there.
Yeah, I just shared actually a more recent blog post from the August 24th. Yeah, so yeah, there's more information out there. But if you have any more questions, feel free to let me know. I'm in the OpenJS lab.
Okay, thanks.
This is sort of building off Michael's comment, but maybe y'all are the right people to field this. I think that's great. And I think probably that should be default for JavaScript projects because everybody's annoyed by it. And I've said it on a few repos, but there's thousands of repos and thousands of maintainers that all need to do this. So it probably good. But I think secondarily, there's the other mode, which is important security updates. And so I think that probably having a bimodal thing where there's the like general hygiene, the dependency freshness mode, which is, at max update one PR once a week and don't ever close it. Just continue to update one with all the things until the maintainer gets to it. That's like one mode. And then the other mode is a new CVE comes in, open a targeted and immediate PR for that with some sort of flag that marks it as high priority. Would probably be ideal. And so that's where I think the security, like obviously if you're just doing the regular hygiene dependency freshness stuff, you are at least doing better than not for security. But if we tune it and we get rid of the noise, you're going to have a delay. And so I think the like high priority security incident mode probably needs to be addressed with Dependabot to make sure that, and again, I would say defaults here would be really helpful. So not everybody has to configure it. I think what we've done internally as some proof of concepts is we have a weekly PR that runs Renovate Bot that does some updates. And then we have the ability to trigger a important security one, which opens an immediate change campaign for that specific, affected package. And so if Dependabot had like, you don't just get it one way. I think that would actually really improve our security posture as a whole open source ecosystem. Because then people would understand, that one came in and I see that one's an important one. It's not my normal weekly one. Sounds like maybe there are some features here. I don't even know about them. So
no, you're good. Short answer to your question, what is important is hard. Affected function data would help that, especially if we could be confident that advisory XYZ has function, whatever, and we can scan your code and say you're not using it. And then assuming we're certain in all of that, we can just not show you the alert. Or, you can set up rules to triage it or whatever. There's a lot that can be done there. We are the data people, right? Like we're trying to get more and better data. I'll just reiterate, internal, there are a couple of Dependabot teams and they care a lot about user experience and they are working on it. Happy to connect you with them if you like, but we're not necessary. Yeah.
Quick question then on the data. Is the data that the update is related to a security vulnerability propagated to the Dependabot internals? So like so the feature that I was mentioning here, which I would love to see, like kind of needs you to have the right data, or they need to get it somewhere. Maybe they get it from you. I don't know, I don't know enough about the internal architecture here. But like, if you're talking about providing the data, a fast and quick win would be those Dependabots PRs are flagged, whether or not they're security fixes. That'd be a huge user experience thing.
Are they not today?
I get so many, I don't even read them. So it doesn't even like, it's not a good situation.
Fair.
So I'm,
Fair.
I usually see them and I go, okay, I need to touch that repo, and I archive I like to delete all those PRs, and then I go do it myself because I can't merge them. I have to test. So I run like a little for loop that just does like an npm outdated, up one, run the test, run the lint, commit, and just do that for every outdated package, because the depend-about ones are just not helpful in that regard. But anyway, I'm sure other people do a different workflow, so I don't.
Yeah, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm not. Yeah, I'm happy to like connect you all with them as well, I feel like.
Cool. Anything else before we wrap up? If not, we'll call it a day. Madison, John, feel free to reach out anytime. Happy to have the conversation or raise awareness about issues and get folks involved. So thank you for taking the time to come chat with us today.
No, we're incredibly appreciative of the time. We obviously understand how important the community is. This will impact much more than just us. So we want to make sure that we're considering everything that we need to, and we're taking feedback always. So please don't hesitate to reach out at any point too. We're happy to follow up on the issue. You'll see more Hubbers following up on the issue as well. And if it makes sense at any point for us to come back to the group for one of these meetings, we're happy to.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
One last question actually I have is this feature and capability going to be proprietary, or are you contributing this to OSV? Like this kind of data will propagate into other.
Yeah, so we're going to export it all to OSV through our GitHub through the repo. Actually, there's a bunch of data already in there. It's just in hand wavy format. Hence this whole conversation.
Explicit about that, because obviously, like giving all our time like back and improving this product. Want to make sure that data doesn't then just live only in GitHub.
Yeah, no, our commitment is to give away all of our data for free forever. So
great. Cool. Good question, Darcy. All right. Well, with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate everyone's time, and I'll see you real soon.